Welcome to Lesson 20A, using Grid View in Web Forms. In order to format a Grid View control, view it in Design View and select the Grid View Task Smart tag to open the Auto Format dialog box. From the Auto Format dialog box, you will find numerous ways to format the grid view. Also, using the Grid View Task Smart tag, you can select which columns you would like to display in your grid view. By default, the grid view will auto-generate all of the fields, which is usually not what you want. So select Edit Columns from the Smart tag in order to select which columns you would like to edit. Now, sometimes you need to fully control what's displayed in a column. In order to do that, convert the column into a templated field. Once you do that, you can put whatever controls you want into the column. Finally, binding data to a grid view is quite simple, especially if you use one of the many data source controls. There are 7 data source controls provided by the ASP.NET 4 framework. They are the Access Data Source, that represents a Microsoft Access database, the Entity Data Source, which represents an entity data model, the Link Data Source, which represents a link to SQL query, the Object Data Source, which represents a business object, the Sitemap Data Source, which represents a site map, the SQL Data Source, which represents a SQL relational database, and finally the XML data source, which represents an XML document. The data source controls are located on the Data tab of the toolbox. The data source ID of a data source control is used to bind the data that the data source control represents to the grid view. This is called declarative data binding. In the previous lesson, I used programmatic data binding. Declarative data binding is easier to use than programmatic data binding, but you lose control of when the data binding occurs because it is handled by the framework instead of your code. In this lesson, you create a grid view that is bound to an entity data model. The lesson requirement is the tasks.mdf file, and the hints for this lesson are: verify that the tasks.mdf file is not read-only, and the grid view is located on the Data tab of the toolbox. Before you get started with this lesson, verify that the task.mdf file is not read-only. Okay, we're good to go. Now select New Project, ASP.NET Web Application, and enter Lesson 20A for the name of the application. Finally, click the OK button. Right-click the App Data folder and select Add Existing Item and navigate to the tasks.mdf file. Now add a new folder called Models. Right-click the folder and select Add New Item. Select Data. Select the ADO.NET Entity Data Model template and name it datamodel.edmx. Select the Generate from Database and click Next. Click the New Connection button and browse to the task.mdf file that is within your current project. Make sure you're not pointing at the one that's on the DVD. Test the connection. Click the OK buttons. Change the name of the entity to TaskDB Entities and click the Next button. Wait for it to populate and then select all of the tables, making sure that the pluralized or singleized generated object names is checked, and also the Include Foreign Key columns in the model is checked. Change the model namespace to Models and click the Finish button. And here is our new entity data model. Now select Build Lesson 20A to build the application. Right-click the name of the property and select Add New Item. Select Web Form using a master page and enter tasks for the name of the new web form and click the Add button. Select the site.master for the master page. Update the title to Tasks and add a grid view from the Data tab of the toolbox. Switch to Design View. Now you can see the Smart tag for the grid view. Open the data source to create a new data source. Select Entity. Change the name of it to Entity Data Source Tasks. Click the OK button. Select the Task DB entities and select Tasks. Now we're going to only display the name and the value from the completed field, and then click the Finish button. Now let's do a little formatting. So click the Auto Format option off of the Smart tag. You can see there's quite a few that you can choose from. We're going to go ahead and choose Classic and click the OK button. Now click F5 to run the application. And there's a formatted grid that shows our two fields.